I can still feel the heat from the flames on my back. Even now, the way the smoke clung to my clothes as I stood on my daughter's porch, holding everything I had left in a single scorched bag. The porch light flickered above me, casting this cold, trembling shadow that didn't feel like mine anymore. And when her eyes met mine, there was a silence so sharp it felt like it split me open. If you've ever been turned away by the person you love most, subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. Hearts break quietly in moments like these. I remember thinking that if I didn't move, I might disappear right there on those steps. That was the moment everything started to unravel. The night my house burned down, it felt as if the world I had spent decades holding together collapsed in a single breath. I remember standing on the sidewalk, watching the flames swallow the walls that had carried every version of me. By the time the sun started to rise, I had nothing but the clothes on my back and an ache I couldn't name. Instinct pushed me toward Lily's place, the one doorway I thought would still be mine. When I reached her porch, soot still clinging to my skin, I felt a strange stillness settle over me. I had imagined relief, maybe even a shaky kind of comfort, but instead I sensed distance the moment she opened the door. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was the quiet kind of rejection that lands deeper because it comes from someone you love. I could feel her holding back, unsure, almost wishing I hadn't come. And in that moment, something inside me folded in on itself. I stood there, numb, realizing that losing my home was only the beginning. The real collapse was knowing my own daughter wasn't ready to let me in. To understand why that moment shattered me, I need to start further back, long before the fire. I walked away from Lily's porch with the kind of hollow ache that only comes when a wound has been slowly forming for years. As I sat with that feeling, memories rose up on their own, almost as if they were trying to remind me how we got here. I became a mother young, and every choice I made after that circled around giving Lily a life that felt steady and safe. I worked long shifts, skipped meals, and stayed up late sewing her costumes for school plays because buying them wasn't always possible. Back then, she used to curl up beside me, telling me she felt proud to have a mom who never gave up. Those moments felt like my whole world, and when she started thriving in school, then college, then her career, I carried that pride like a second heartbeat, but somewhere along the way, the girl who once clung to my side became a woman shaped by expectations I couldn't always understand. She wanted things to look perfect. Her job, her apartment, even the people around her. And I started feeling like a reminder of a past she wanted to outgrow. It wasn't one fight or one misunderstanding. It was a slow drift, subtle enough that I kept telling myself it was just life moving forward. But standing on her porch that morning, I finally felt the full weight of everything left unsaid. And that realization followed me all the way to the motel where my lowest moment waited. The motel I found that night sat behind a gas station, the kind of place people passed without seeing. The carpet smelled faintly of damp air, and the humming from the old heater barely reached the corners of the room. When I closed the door behind me, the silence settled like another weight on my chest. I remember sinking onto the edge of the bed, feeling the springs push back as if even the mattress resisted holding me up. That was the moment everything broke open. The fire, the porch, the look on Lily's face. It all caught up with me at once. I cried in a way I hadn't allowed myself to in years. Not just from grief, but from the shame of realizing I had nowhere left to land. I kept asking myself how I had become someone who no longer had a place in her own child's life. It was a hollow, terrifying question, and it left me staring at the peeling wallpaper as if it held an answer. By the time morning light crept through the blinds, my tears had dried into a tight ache. I didn't feel hopeful, but I felt emptied out enough to move. So I stepped outside with no plan at all, just a heavy heart guiding me toward the only streets I still remembered. The morning air felt sharp against my skin as I stepped out of the motel, my body still heavy from the night before. I didn't have a destination in mind. My feet just carried me forward, past the gas station, past the highway, until the streets around me softened into something familiar. I hadn't walked through my old neighborhood in years, yet every cracked sidewalk and leaning porch felt like an echo of who I used to be. I slowed when I reached the corner where Dottie lived. Her house looked the same, weathered, welcoming, stubborn in its own way. I hadn't planned on seeing her, but life has a way of pulling you toward the people who once held you together. When she opened her door and wrapped me into her space, I felt something inside me loosen. She didn't need to say much. Her presence alone pressed through the fog I'd been drowning in. I could almost hear the way she used to remind me I was stronger than the storms around me. Standing there, I realized how desperately I needed that reminder. The despair that had swallowed me whole began to thin, just enough for a small spark to breathe again. And with that spark, a new kind of resolve started forming, quiet, but unmistakable. I sat at Dottie's kitchen table with my old savings notebook spread open in front of me, its pages worn from years of hopes I never said out loud. As I traced the numbers, I felt a strange mix of disbelief and recognition. Every dollar in that notebook had come from late shifts, quiet sacrifices, and all the moments when I chose stability for Lily over comfort for myself. I had always imagined using it someday, but never imagined using it for me. When the idea of Beaufort surfaced in my mind, it didn't feel impulsive. It felt like remembering something I had forgotten I deserved. I found a listing for a small coastal house, weathered gray siding, a porch overlooking marsh grass, sunlight spilling through wide windows. It wasn't luxury. It was peace. It was mine. The decision settled into me with surprising ease. I wasn't running away from Lily or trying to prove anything. I was choosing myself, maybe for the first time. After the paperwork was set in motion, I took one photo of the house and sent it to her. No explanation, just a quiet marker that my life was moving forward. And as I drove toward that new beginning, I felt the air shift, like something powerful was finally waking up. The house was still mostly empty when I arrived, its rooms echoing with the soft hush of the marsh outside. Sunlight stretched across the wooden floors, catching dust in the air like drifting sparks. I walked slowly from room to room, letting the quiet settle into me. For the first time in a long while, I felt anchored. I was standing in a space I had chosen for myself, not out of necessity, but out of intention. I heard Lily's car before I saw her, the crunch of gravel, the hurried footsteps. She carried the same urgency she had that morning on the porch, but this time it was wrapped in something sharper. When she stepped inside, her eyes swept over the empty rooms with a mixture of shock and disbelief. I watched her try to hold herself together, smoothing the edges of her expression the way she always did when she felt exposed. It struck me how young she looked in that moment, and how tightly she clung to the image she'd built around her life. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. My presence in that house, the keys resting on the counter, the open windows catching the breeze, They all answered the questions she didn't know how to ask. I could feel her confusion giving way to fear, then flickering into something more vulnerable, almost like recognition. Standing across from her, I held my ground, not in anger but in clarity. This house was my line in the sand, a quiet statement that her rejection hadn't ended me, it had redirected me. There was a moment, a long, suspended silence, when she looked at me as if she sensed something shifting beneath the surface, something she hadn't been prepared to face. And that was when everything truly began to unravel. After Lily left the house that afternoon, the silence felt heavier than it had earlier. It wasn't the quiet of a new place anymore. It was the quiet of something unsettled, something unfinished. I wandered from room to room, touching the walls, running my fingers along the windowsills, trying to steady myself after the confrontation. My breath finally began to slow when I reached the small storage closet near the back. A sliver of an old cardboard box caught my eye, wedged behind a stack of paint supplies the previous owner must have left. I knelt down, intending only to push it aside, but when I lifted it, the lid slipped open. Inside were a few stray papers. Nothing remarkable, until I saw the edge of an envelope tucked between them. My heart stuttered. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. Broad strokes, slightly tilted, the way her father used to write when he signed school forms or notes for the fridge. I hadn't seen it in years. For a moment, I just held the envelope, feeling its weight travel up my arm like a memory I wasn't prepared to face. When I finally opened it, the air around me seemed to shift. It wasn't a formal letter, just a short message, soft, hopeful. He had tried to reach me. He had come back once, maybe more than once, wanting to repair what had fallen apart, and Lily had known. My hands trembled as I realized the truth. She hadn't simply drifted away from me. She had taken control of the narrative between her parents, reshaping it in ways I never imagined she could. The pieces of our past rearranged themselves in my mind, revealing gaps I didn't know existed. Grief and understanding tangled in my chest. I wasn't just mourning what I lost. I was mourning what I never even knew I had a chance to regain. As I stood there holding that letter, I sensed there was more buried beneath the years, and I knew I had only uncovered the first layer. I wandered through the house as if the walls themselves had shifted since I found that first letter. Every room felt different, as though the air carried a quiet warning that there was still more I hadn't seen, more I hadn't understood. I tried to steady myself by focusing on small things, the grain of the wooden banister, the soft echo of my footsteps, but the unease lingered, tugging at me with every breath. When I opened a drawer in the hallway table, I intended only to find a place for my keys. Instead, I found another envelope tucked beneath a stack of old manuals, its edges crisp, the handwriting painfully familiar and unmistakably recent. My heart lurched as I held it. The first letter had shaken me, but this one felt heavier, as if it carried years I didn't realize I had lost. When I broke the seal, my hands trembled. His words spilled out with a tenderness I hadn't expected, lines filled with remorse, accountability, and a kind of steady love I thought had died long ago. He wrote about trying to make amends, about hoping to rebuild something fragile but real. He spoke of mistakes without hiding from them, and of returning more than once, hoping I might be willing to hear him. As I read, I felt the truth unravel slowly inside me. He had reached out multiple times. He hadn't just made one attempt to reconnect. He had tried again and again, and Lily had known. She had taken those chances, folded them into silence, and tucked them away where she thought they would never be found. A wave of emotions flooded me, anger sharp enough to sting, compassion for a man I once loved, grief for all the years that slipped away without me even knowing they were offered back to me. The letters didn't rewrite our past, but they reframed it, casting light on shadows I never realized were there. Standing in that quiet hallway, I felt something settle inside me. I deserved answers. I deserved closure. And I knew, with a painful certainty, that I had to seek it myself. When I walked back into the house after everything I had uncovered, the silence no longer felt threatening. It felt open, almost expectant, as if the walls were waiting for me to decide who I wanted to be now. I started with small things. I wiped down the counters, folded the blankets stacked in the living room, and let fresh air drift through the windows. Each simple task steadied me, reminding me that rebuilding didn't have to be dramatic. Sometimes it was just choosing to care for a space again, piece by piece, until it began to feel like mine. Lily stopped by more often during those days. She never announced herself, and she never tried to explain anything. But she hovered in doorways and handed me tools or held a board in place while I hammered. Those tiny gestures felt like her way of reaching for me without knowing how to say it. I let the quiet between us do its work. Healing didn't need speeches. It needed presence. As the rooms took shape, an idea began to grow inside me. This house could be more than a private refuge. It could be a place for women who had lost their footing in life, the way I had. I pictured spare beds, warm meals, quiet conversations at the kitchen table. I found myself researching the early steps of forming a small nonprofit, letting purpose fill the empty spaces grief had carved out. Nothing about this phase was perfect or fast. Some mornings I still felt the weight of everything I had learned, but most days carried a soft kind of hope, enough to keep me moving. And as the house brightened, something in me brightened too, ready for whatever came next. I remember the morning I realized the house was meant to hold more than my own healing. I stood in the front room with the sunlight drifting across the floor, and it struck me that the quiet I had found here could be shared. The thought felt both tender and bold, as if something inside me had finally stretched awake. So I began shaping the place with intention. I chose soft paint colors that made the rooms feel warm, cleared out spaces that had been cluttered with old memories, and set up small corners where someone could breathe without feeling watched. Each change felt like I was carving out dignity, one careful gesture at a time. Word spread faster than I expected. A few neighbors stopped by with spare furniture, offering their support through simple actions that spoke volumes. An old friend from Wilmington helped me repair a back door that had been sticking since the day I moved in. Their presence reminded me that community wasn't something dramatic. It was built through steady hands, shared purpose, and the willingness to show up. With every improvement, the house seemed to exhale, as if it understood what it was becoming. I found myself imagining who might someday rest in these rooms, women who needed safety, time, or simply someone to believe they were worthy of a fresh start. Preparing the house for them filled a quiet space in me, one I never knew was empty until it began to fill. By the time I finished setting the last room in order, the home felt different. It no longer carried just my story. It felt ready to hold many. And as I stepped back to take in the space, I sensed that the real journey would begin when the first women walked through the door. I remember standing near the back of the room, trying to steady my breath as people gathered for the small opening event at the sanctuary. I hadn't expected Lily to come, much less take a place near the front where everyone could see her. The sight of her there tightened something in my chest. Part of me braced for disappointment, the way you do when your heart has been bruised too many times. I kept reminding myself to stay grounded, to let the moment unfold without assuming anything. When she stepped forward, it wasn't with dramatic flair or polished confidence. It was quiet, almost hesitant, but unmistakably intentional. She spoke through her presence more than anything else, through the way she held herself, the way she looked at me, and the way she acknowledged the women in the room with a humility I had rarely seen from her. I could feel the weight of her remorse, her recognition of the harm she had caused, and her determination to grow beyond it. She didn't have to say the words. Her actions carried them. As I watched her, something inside me eased. Not completely. Healing rarely happens all at once, but enough to let hope slip in. I felt a soft swell of relief, mixed with gratitude that she was finally willing to stand in the truth rather than hide from it. For the first time in a long while, I saw the young girl I once knew inside the woman she was becoming. When our eyes met, it wasn't an apology and it wasn't forgiveness. It was a beginning, fragile, honest, and real. And even as the room filled with gentle applause, I sensed there was still one more piece of our story waiting to surface, something I wasn't yet ready to name but could feel moving toward me. I wasn't expecting anything that morning. I was sweeping the front hallway, letting the quiet settle around me, when I heard a soft knock. A delivery driver handed me a small, weathered package with my name written in the handwriting I had just begun to accept I would never see again. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I just stood there, feeling the weight of it in my hands, heavier than its size should allow. I carried it to the kitchen table and sat down, bracing myself the way you do before touching an old scar. When I opened it, I found a simple wooden box and a letter folded with the same careful precision he always used. Reading his words felt like stepping back into a room I once lived in. He wrote about the mistakes he made, the years he spent running from himself, and the hope that one day I would find peace without the shadow of what we lost. He thanked me for loving him when he didn't know how to love himself. He said he never stopped wanting to make things right, even when life kept slipping through his fingers. Inside the box was a small compass, the one he carried when we were young. He wrote that it always pointed him back to what mattered, even when he didn't follow it. Now he wanted it to guide me, not toward him, but toward whatever life still had waiting. As I held it, something inside me finally loosened. The grief, the anger, the unanswered questions. Everything softened into something I could finally set down. I felt myself steady, grounded in a way I hadn't been in years. For the first time, I was ready to move forward, not with bitterness, but with quiet, honest peace. Looking back now, I barely recognize the woman who stood on that porch with ash on her clothes and nowhere to go. I have walked through fire in more ways than one, yet somehow the journey led me to a life fuller and softer than anything I imagined. I found healing in rebuilding these walls, purpose in opening them to others, and a deeper understanding of love through the fragile steps my daughter and I learned to take together. My ex-husband's final gift settled something inside me that had been aching for years. It reminded me that forgiveness isn't about erasing the past, but about freeing yourself to move forward without carrying its weight. I feel lighter now, steadier, and grateful for every person who helped me rise when I could barely stand. If there is one truth I hold on to, it's that resilience grows quietly, one small choice at a time. Healing doesn't arrive all at once. It gathers, it builds, and one day you realize you're standing in a place you once believed you'd never reach. Thank you for listening to my story. If any part of it touched your heart or reminded you of your own journey, I hope you'll share it below. Your story matters too.